Okay, so you want to buy a private island. Find a patch of land surrounded by ocean, put up a few beach houses, and spend your mornings watching the sunrise over water that belongs entirely to you. Here is what nobody tells you before that dream takes over. The cheapest private islands in the world cost less than a studio apartment in Manhattan. We are talking $50,000. You could put that on a credit card. And yet, the people who buy those islands, fully grown adults with real money and real intentions, frequently end up broke, defeated, and quietly trying to sell the thing back to anyone willing to take it. That is not a coincidence. That is the economics of private island ownership. And by the time this is over, you are going to understand exactly why. Before we talk about money, we need to talk about what a private island actually is. Because most people have it completely wrong. When you buy a private island, you are not buying a country. You are not buying independence. You are not opting out of rules, taxes, or governments. You are buying a piece of real estate that happens to be surrounded by water, and every single law of the country it sits in applies to you just as much as it does to someone who bought a house in the suburbs. You do not own the ocean around it. Ships can sail past your island whenever they want. Commercial fishermen can fish in the waters around your shoreline. In many countries, anyone can walk along the beach at low tide, regardless of what your deed says. In places like the British Virgin Islands, France, and dozens of other countries, the strip of land closest to the water is legally public, no matter who holds the title to the dry land above it. And then there is the question of what kind of ownership you actually have. In the Bahamas and parts of the Caribbean, you can buy freehold land, meaning you own it outright, the same way you would own a house in Texas. But in places like Fiji, almost all land is owned by indigenous communities, and what you are actually buying is a lease, the right to use the land for 50 to 99 years. That sounds like a long time. It is not. Every year that passes, your lease gets shorter, your asset loses value, and the day eventually comes when the land simply reverts back to its original owners. You built a resort on it? Still theirs. You put in a dock? Still theirs. In Vanuatu, in Tonga, in much of the South Pacific, the leasehold model is the norm. In St. Lucia, there is something called the Queen's Chain, a strip of land extending almost 200 feet from the high water mark that is legally reserved for public use. You cannot build on it. You cannot fence it. It does not matter how much you paid. So the first thing to understand is this. Private island ownership is not what the brochures suggest. It is a real estate transaction in a foreign country with foreign laws and a government that will still be collecting taxes from you long after you have sailed home. Now let us talk about what islands actually cost. Because here is where things get genuinely strange. The cheapest private islands in the world are in Canada, Nova Scotia, Ontario, the Great Lakes. You can buy a small island in Nova Scotia for under $100,000. Some go for as little as $50,000. That is cheaper than a car, but there is a reason for that price. These islands have nothing on them. No electricity, no running water, no dock, no road, no building. Frozen for 4 or 5 months a year. Accessible only by boat and only in good weather. They are, in practical terms, very expensive rocks, move to the Caribbean, and the prices jump immediately. A small undeveloped cay in Belize or Panama starts around $250,000. Something with a beach and a cleared lot might be $500,000 to $1 million. A developed island, meaning one with an actual house, a dock, and some kind of power supply, starts at around $5 million. In the Bahamas, where the weather is reliable and the proximity to Florida makes logistics easier, prices start at $1 million and climb quickly. The best positioned, most developed islands in the Exumas or Abaco regularly sell for $20 to $50 million. At the very top, you have islands like Lanai in Hawaii, which Larry Ellison, the founder of Oracle, bought in 2012 for $300 million. That purchase came with 90,000 acres, 2 Four Seasons resorts, a water utility, most of the island's housing, and the only gas station and grocery store on the island. When you buy an island that includes the only gas station, you are not buying a vacation home. You are buying a small town. But here is the part that catches almost everyone off guard. Analysts who track island transactions have found that buyers of undeveloped islands consistently spend close to double the listing price before the island becomes livable. A $500,000 island becomes a $900,000 island by the time you have installed a dock, a water system, some solar panels, and basic communications equipment. A $2 million island becomes $3.5 million. The purchase price is just the entry fee to a much longer, much more expensive process. So you have bought your island. You have signed the papers, wired the money, and technically you are now a private island owner. Congratulations, now the real spending begins. Before a single guest arrives, before you spend a single night on the property, you have a set of problems that mainland real estate simply does not have. And every one of those problems costs money to solve, The first problem is water. Most small islands have no natural freshwater supply. No rivers, no lakes, no aquifer, nothing. Rain falls on them, sure, but rainfall is seasonal, unreliable, and easily contaminated. You cannot run a household, let alone a resort, on collected rainwater alone. The solution that virtually every serious island owner eventually come to is a desalination system. This is a machine that takes seawater, forces it through a series of very fine membranes, and removes the salt to produce drinking water. The technology works extremely well. It is also expensive to buy, expensive to run, and requires constant maintenance in the kind of humid, salt-heavy environment that destroys mechanical equipment faster than almost anything else on Earth. A small desalination system capable of producing around 5,000 liters of fresh water a day, enough for a modest private residence, costs somewhere between $30,000 and $100,000 to install. A larger system capable of supporting a resort with guests costs significantly more. Running one of these systems on diesel power, which most islands rely on initially, can add up to $15,000 a year in fuel and maintenance costs alone. The filters need replacing. The membranes need servicing. In a saltwater environment, parts corrode faster than the manufacturer's warranty assumes. The second problem is electricity. Islands have no grid. No power lines running under the ocean to connect them to the mainland. Every watt of electricity you use has to be generated on the island itself, and the traditional way of doing that is with diesel generators. Diesel generators work. They are reliable. They are also extraordinarily expensive to run when you factor in the cost of shipping diesel fuel by boat to a remote location. When you buy diesel on the mainland and then pay to barge it to an island, the effective cost of that electricity comes out to somewhere between 60 cents and $1 per kilowatt hour. The average price of electricity in the continental United States is roughly 16 cents per kilowatt hour. You are paying 4 to 6 times as much for power just because of where you are. The smart move, and the move that almost every serious developer eventually makes, is to install a solar energy system with battery storage and use diesel only as a backup. A solar setup capable of reliably powering a mid-sized island property costs between $50,000 and $200,000 to install. That is a large upfront cost, but it cuts monthly electricity expenses dramatically. Some estimates suggest it can drop a monthly electricity bill from $5,000 down to $150 over time. But here is the catch that most people miss. Solar panels on an island are not the same as solar panels on a house in Arizona. Salt air corrodes the mounting hardware. Salt spray coats the panels and reduces their efficiency. The batteries that store power degrade faster in tropical heat and humidity. You are not installing a 25-year system. You are installing a system that will need significant maintenance every few years, and you need to budget for that from day one. The third problem is getting there. Your island needs a dock. That dock has to be deep enough for your boat, strong enough to handle rough weather, and positioned so that it does not get destroyed every time a storm comes through. A basic dock on an island costs at minimum $75,000. A proper deep-water marina facility can cost several $100,000. And then you need to maintain it constantly. Because saltwater eats metal, concrete, and timber with patient ferocity, if the island is remote enough that a dock is not sufficient, you need a helipad, or a landing strip. A certified helipad costs tens of thousands of dollars. A small airstrip, the kind that can handle a light aircraft, runs into the hundreds of thousands. And those surfaces need to be maintained. Cracks appear, vegetation grows through, drainage systems clog. In hurricane-prone areas, the whole thing may need rebuilding after a bad storm season. Let us say you have solved the big problems. You have a water system, a power system, and a way to get there. Now let us talk about what it costs to simply maintain all of that every year, regardless of whether you set foot on the island at all. Because here is something most buyers do not fully appreciate until it is too late. The ocean never stops working against you. Salt air is corrosive in a way that is difficult to fully understand until you have watched it in action. Metal rusts, wood rots, paint peels. Electrical wiring corrodes. Structural supports weaken. Every piece of equipment you install on a tropical island is fighting a constant battle against humidity, salt spray, and biological growth, and every year it loses a little more of that battle. Professionals who manage island properties typically budget somewhere between 3 and 7% of the total value of installed equipment and structures just for annual maintenance and corrosion repair. On a modestly developed island where the total infrastructure is worth $2 million, that is between $60,000 and $140,000 a year in maintenance costs, just to stop the island from deteriorating. Not to improve it, not to renovate it, just to keep it where it is. Then there is staffing. Even a private island used only by its owner needs a caretaker. Someone to check the water system, run the generator, cut back the vegetation, watch for intruders, and deal with whatever breaks while you are not there. In the Caribbean, a good caretaker costs $2,000 to $3,500 a month. A captain for your boat adds another $2,000 to $3,000 a month. If the island is large enough to need a groundskeeper and a housekeeper on top of that, monthly payroll starts to look a lot like a mid-sized small business. Then there is insurance. And this is where island owners frequently get the biggest shock. Standard homeowners insurance does not cover remote islands. You need specialty coverage, what the insurance industry calls surplus lines coverage, which is more expensive, harder to obtain, and comes with more exclusions than anything you have ever read. Annual premiums for a developed island in a hurricane-prone area of the Caribbean range from $100,000 to $500,000 per year, depending on the value of the property and the perceived risk. And the risk is real. Hurricane Irma hit the British Virgin Islands in September of 2017 as a Category 5 storm. Richard Branson, who owns Necker Island in the BVI and turned it into one of the most famous private island resorts in the world, described the destruction as devastating. Buildings were ripped apart. Infrastructure was destroyed. The island had to shut down completely for months of reconstruction. And Branson, a billionaire with the resources to rebuild, described it as one of the most difficult experiences he had faced as a property owner. For someone without Branson's resources, a storm like that is not an inconvenience. It is a financial catastrophe, which is why some insurers have begun declining to cover islands in the most exposed parts of the Caribbean at any price. Add up property taxes, satellite communications, legal and regulatory compliance fees, annual environmental surveys where required, and a security system capable of monitoring a remote perimeter, and you are looking at annual carrying costs. Before you buy a single tube of sunscreen or a single bottle of champagne, somewhere between $84,000 and $310,000 for a modest to mid-range island property every single year. Whether you use the island or not, if the island you bought is raw land and you want to actually develop it, build a house, a guest house, a dock, anything, you are facing a construction cost problem that will genuinely astonish you. On the mainland, building a house is expensive but predictable. You hire a contractor. They source materials locally. Workers drive to the site. If a delivery is late, you wait a day. The process is inefficient, but it works. On a remote island, none of that is true. Every single bag of concrete, every beam, every electrical wire, every pipe, every piece of glass, and every door hinge has to be put on a boat and shipped to your island. That shipping cost adds to the price of every single material you use. Then, because there is no local workforce of skilled tradespeople on your island, you have to import your construction crew from the mainland. They need somewhere to sleep. They need food. They need boats to get back and forth. They are being paid travel premiums because they are away from home. And if the weather turns bad, which it will, because you are in the ocean, work stops, and you are still paying for all of it. The result is that construction on a remote island typically costs between 1.5 and 2 times what the same project would cost on the mainland. A house that would cost $500,000 to build in Florida might cost $800,000 to $1 million on your private Bahamian Cay. A simple dock that would cost $50,000 in a marina might cost $100,000 once you factor in the marine crane, the specialist labor, and the barge fees. This multiplier applies to everything. Every renovation, every repair, every upgrade. For as long as you own the island, Richard Branson bought Necker Island in the British Virgin Islands in 1978 for $180,000. He was 28 years old, had just started Virgin Records, and had talked the previous owner down from the original asking price, after being turned away with a low offer of $100,000. The seller, who needed capital quickly, eventually agreed. The British Virgin Islands government agreed to the sale with one condition. Branson had to develop the island within 4 years. He spent the next 3 years and $10 million building the resort that stands there today. Balinese-style villas, an open-air great house, tennis courts, a fleet of water sports equipment, and the infrastructure needed to support it all. $10 million on top of the $180,000 purchase price. Today, Necker Island rents for $118,000 to $140,000 per night when booked exclusively for a group of up to 48 guests. At that rate, a single week generates close to $1 million in revenue. Individual rooms during what the island calls celebration weeks go for $5,650 a night per room. The island employs around 120 staff to serve a maximum of 48 guests. That is a staff-to-guest ratio that most hotels would find laughably impractical. But that ratio, more than 2 staff for every guest, is part of what justifies the price. The exclusivity, the personal service, the feeling that the entire island exists for you alone. That is the product. But even at those rates, the operating costs are enormous. 120 staff, a fleet of boats, a water system, a power system, food imported by boat, a security operation. Insurance for a property that Hurricane Irma described in 2017 as having been utterly devastated. The cost of rebuilding after that storm ran to multiple millions of dollars. Branson spent months coordinating repairs while simultaneously advocating publicly for climate action. The lesson from Necker is not that island resorts are easy businesses. It is that island resorts require the resources to absorb setbacks that would bankrupt most owners, and the marketing power to fill bed prices most guests would not consider unless they were genuinely extraordinary. Here is where the story gets more interesting. Because some private islands do make money, not many, but some. And understanding how they do it tells you a lot about the structure of the business. The islands that work commercially tend to follow one of a few models. The first is the ultra-luxury exclusive resort. You charge so much per night, $5,000, $10,000, $20,000, that you only need to be occupied for a fraction of the year to cover your costs. Necker Island is the obvious example. So is Lakala Island in Fiji, which Larry Ellison's former business colleague Red Bull founder Dietrich Mateschitz bought in 2003 for around $10 million and turned into a resort that charges guests $10,000 a night for private villas, includes a working farm, a golf course, and a private airstrip, and employs several hundred staff for a property that accommodates a maximum of 30 guests. The economics of this model are straightforward in theory. You are charging an enormous premium for absolute privacy and personalized service. A guest paying $10,000 a night for a week is paying $70,000 for a vacation. At that price, the guest is not asking whether the buffet has options. The guest is asking whether the chef can prepare a specific dish that was not on the menu. The margin has to be there to deliver that level of service, but the model is fragile in a way that is easy to underestimate. Occupancy on island resorts is deeply seasonal. The peak season, dry weather, calm seas, the month when ultra-wealthy families are taking vacations, runs roughly from November to April in the Caribbean. For those months, occupancy can hit 85 to 90%, and the resort is genuinely profitable. Then the summer comes, the hurricane season arrives, and occupancy can drop to 45% or lower. All those fixed costs, staff salaries, utility bills, maintenance crews, keep running regardless. A single bad hurricane season can wipe out an entire year's profits. 2 bad seasons in a row can create a cash crisis that forces a sale. The second model that works is what you might call the occasional rental, a well-developed private island that the owner uses personally for part of the year and rents to corporate clients or wealthy families for the rest. This model requires a very specific type of owner, someone who has the capital to fund the carrying costs, the taste to create a property worth renting, and the flexibility to share the island with strangers for part of the year. It works, but it works best when the owner is wealthy enough that they do not need the rental income to survive. It is a bonus, not a requirement. The third model that occasionally works is film and content production. Private islands get used for advertising shoots, music videos, and reality television. These bookings can generate tens of thousands of dollars for a few days. But you cannot build a sustainable business on occasional rentals alone. There are really only 2 types of people who buy private islands with any regularity, and they have almost nothing in common. The first type is what you might call the trophy buyer. This is a wealthy individual, typically someone with a net worth north of $50 million, who buys an island primarily as a lifestyle asset. Privacy is the main motivation. Prestige is the secondary one. These buyers are not running spreadsheets on their return on investment. They are buying something that cannot be replicated by any amount of money spent on hotels or yachts. The experience of absolute control over a piece of geography. For this buyer, the annual carrying costs, even if they run into the hundreds of thousands of dollars, are simply the price of ownership. The way a wealthy person accepts that a yacht costs money to maintain and a jet costs money to fly. The island is not an investment. It is a possession. The second type is the commercial investor, a hospitality group, a private equity fund, or an experienced developer who is buying specifically to generate revenue. These buyers do not romanticize the asset. They analyze it: accessibility, weather patterns, existing infrastructure, competitive market rates. They run detailed projections on occupancy levels needed to cover costs and deliver a return. The commercial investor understands something the trophy buyer sometimes misses. An island that loses money every year is not a romantic investment in seclusion. It is a liability sitting in the middle of the ocean, waiting for the next hurricane season. Let us do the numbers on 2 scenarios for a mid-range developed island in the Caribbean. Something purchased for $5 million with existing basic infrastructure. The optimistic scenario looks like this. You spend another $2 million upgrading the power system, the water system, the dock, and the main residence. You are now in at $7 million. You rent the island to corporate groups and wealthy families for $100,000 a week, and you manage to book 20 weeks a year, roughly 40% of the year. That generates $2 million in gross revenue annually. Your annual operating costs, staff, maintenance, insurance, utilities, resupply, run about $800,000. Your net income before taxes and debt service is around $1,200,000 a year. At that rate, you would recoup your initial $7 million investment in about 6 years. Not bad. Now the realistic scenario, in year 2, a major storm tears through the Caribbean during peak season, damages your dock, destroys one of your guest houses, and forces you to cancel 4 weeks of bookings. Rebuilding costs $400,000. Your insurer covers some of it after a lengthy claims process. You net 12 booked weeks instead of 20. Revenue drops to $1,200,000. Costs remain at $800,000. Your net is $400,000. Your payback period just stretched from 6 years to much longer, and that is assuming the next 5 years go perfectly. The difference between a good year and a bad year on a private island is roughly $800,000. That gap between what you expected and what you got is the entire business model. Owning a private island is not a real estate investment. It is not a vacation home purchase. It is the acquisition of a remote, off-grid infrastructure company that happens to be surrounded by ocean, staffed by people who depend on you, regulated by a government you did not choose, exposed to weather events you cannot predict, and maintained at enormous cost regardless of whether it generates a single dollar of revenue. The purchase price, whether it is $50,000 for a frozen Canadian rock or $300 million for an inhabited Hawaiian island, is the smallest part of the story. The real economics begin the moment the deed is signed. The water system that needs replacing. The generator that breaks in the middle of a booking. The hurricane that does not care about your occupancy calendar. The insurance company that quietly raises your premium every year as the climate gets harder to predict. Richard Branson built one of the most famous private island resorts in the world, charged up to $140,000 a night, and still watched a hurricane level it in a matter of hours. Larry Ellison bought an entire Hawaiian island for $300 million, then spent another $450 million developing it, and more than a decade later is still working toward the sustainable vision he announced on day one. Private islands can be extraordinary. Some of them are businesses. Some of them are legacies. Some of them are genuine investments that appreciate in value and generate real returns for disciplined operators with deep pockets and the patience to wait out the bad years. But for most people who walk into this world without a clear-eyed understanding of what they are actually buying, not just the beach, not just the sunsets, but the water plant, the generator fuel, the staffing roster, and the insurance premium. A private island is the most expensive way to discover that paradise has a monthly bill.